Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone out there in the world. I would like to thank each one of you to our LISA PodiumX series panel discussion today. For those who are the first time attendee, LISA is a kind of a lead incubator and a startup accelerator founded by Stanford GSB participants for the lead community. Is an ecosystem for innovators and startup founders. It is the first hybrid platform for incubating ideas to MVP and scaling ventures globally. PodiumX series is our curated engagement speaker series platform designed within the LISA for founders, venture capital, industry thought leaders, emerging tech and product ecosystem. My name is Jian. I'm the founding partner at LISA. Today I'm joined by my other partners, Joe Anthony from Sydney, Australia, who will be facilitating today's panel discussion. And other partners, we have Deepti Pao from Sydney, Switzerland, and then we have Edward Mont from New York City, and Misa Baiko from Silicon Valley. I would like to thank each one of you, today's panelists, Stanford GSB lead, and Rebuild team members for supporting today's event. Today's panel discussion is focused on the corporate ventures and how startups are solving the industry problems. And this is a kind of a follow-up discussion as well. We have had a couple of other related series in the past. I'm very fortunate to have all these amazing panelists today. So first, let me introduce Tara Badri, who is a head of digital innovation and scouting at BASF Corporation. Toby Norton-Smith, managing director at X15 Ventures. Sallie, Jian, head of SAP.io Foundry New York SAP. So with that, I would ask Joe to go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for joining this panel discussion. And thanks to Hira for a great introduction. So we have a very interesting topic on hand. It's interesting to me because normally when I think about disruptive innovations or disruptive business models, we invariably think about, fearless entrepreneurs, startups, small operations mentored by accelerators, bootstrapped or funded by angel investors, venture capitalists, and so forth, and so on and so forth, right? So, but over the past few years, a new scene has started emerging, right? So it's not a new scene anymore because apparently, as per a Forbes magazine article that I read recently, about 25% of all venture deals that happened, in the past year apparently came from corporate venture capital. Okay, so corporate innovation and corporate entrepreneurship has actually come into the scene in a big way. And the trend is ascending. It's not static, it's always growing continuously as well. Okay, and today's panelists are among the key people who are actually in the driver's seat of this trend, so to speak. And so let's jump in straight into the discussion and explore this wonderful new area that has emerged, right? So essentially, just to warm up to this discussion, I think I would like to get to know the panelists a bit more to understand, what your company is about and what the vision behind it is, as well as, understand your role, in fulfilling that big vision that your company has. Maybe start with Sallie to get started, if you can just introduce what SAP.io is all about and your role within SAP.io. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe and Hira, for Okay. So I'm Sallie, Jian, and I'm part of an organization called SAP.io. SAP.io is part of SAP. We're the corporate innovation and venture capital arm, and we launched about 3 years ago. Within SAP.io lives 2 branches, our venture capital fund as well as our foundries. And across SAP.io, we look for enterprise software startups that can be complementary and strategic fits for SAP. So we're a very strategic venture capital arm of SAP. We're looking at companies that we think can integrate with our solutions and also add value to SAP customers. And SAP, for those of you who are not familiar, we're one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world. And we serve 400,000 plus enterprise customers, and we play in a dozen plus really core industries. And that gives us a potential to really work with a variety of startups from anywhere from retail sector to healthcare to future of work to industry 4.0, supply chain, and then also with emerging technologies in computer vision, 3D, AR, VR, blockchain, you name it. And I run our New York program, and we are actually looking for great companies right now in the automotive, retail, and manufacturing space for New York. And for San Francisco, we're focused on future of work, and we do have 9 locations throughout the world on the Foundry side. The 2 I mentioned, North America, 4 locations in EMEA, and 3 locations in Asia. And just for quick brief background on myself, I started out in California. I'm actually in California right now. I grew up here. I went to Berkeley. I was a business major. I worked at Morgan Stanley Technology Investment Banking. And then I was in New York at a private equity firm called General Atlantic. And then after that, I've been in the startup and venture capital world for a handful of years and joined SAP.io, SAP about 2.5 years ago to help launch IO in New York.
Awesome, Sallie. Thank you and welcome. Next, we will go over to Toby and then to Tara. Can I request you to keep the introduction to around 2 minutes mark so we can actually get into the meat of the discussion as well. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
No dramas at all. I'll go quickly. To set it context on X15 Ventures, I probably need to explain who our parent company is. So a business called Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is a very big deal down here in Australia and probably a very small deal on a global scale. So we're Commonwealth Bank is Australia's largest bank, both a retail bank, institutional business bank, et cetera. X15, and their vision is, the financial well-being of their customers or their purpose. For X15, our vision is about building a next generation of solutions in and around banking. So we're a venture builder vehicle, and we want to target all of the assets and leverage we can get from our parent entity.
Okay, over to Tara. Welcome, Tara. And so can we understand a little bit about what BASF is about and your vision and your role within BASF overall?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Tara Badri. I head North American Digital Innovation and Scouting at BASF. BASF is the largest multinational B2B chemical company. So you may have not heard of us, but our products are in most things that you may use or your car, from the paints in your car to the plastics to the fertilizers of the food that you eat or the active ingredients in the cleaning products or healthcare products which you use. We are a 60 billion euro company with a presence all over the world. At BASF, we realized that digital is our way forward. And there's some elements of digital which are just updating some of our manual systems. But what I do is the really fun stuff, really the innovative, the things that are going to disrupt us to move us forward. So we, my group, works to find the really different out there technologies and find opportunities to test them. So we pilot these technologies, which I help support with fast processes and determine if there's value. We also look at using technologies for the creation of new digital business models. So it's definitely a big shift in our organization because we are a materials company. But how can we look at using new digital technologies to disrupt ourselves? So
Awesome.
I've been at BASF for, sorry, one more second. I've been at BASF for 2 years. And prior to BASF, I worked, I had also a former tech founder, fintech founder, similar to Toby before fintech was a sexy thing and sexy word to use. And then past career also in consulting at Deloitte for many years. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to share perspectives and connect with this community.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thanks to all the panelists as well. It was a great introduction. Let's now dive straight into the topic. So let me begin with this questions, right? So great innovations, the foundations of it is obviously great ideas. Where do you guys go looking for ideas, right? How do you scout for ideas? Is it internally within the organization, or is it more do you go outside the bounds of your organization in search of great ideas? Maybe let's begin with yourself, Tara, and then we'll go around on that question. Yeah.
Sure. So we believe that innovation is exponential and that we can't necessarily create or build fast enough in our organization, so we rely very heavily externally. So we have very strong relationships with ecosystem partners that helps us to have a presence and raise awareness on what new technologies are up and coming, and then helps us as we figure out what technologies we want to test, where there are opportunities. So one of our partners that we rely heavily on actually is SAP.io. We might come to them and say, hey, we're looking for technologies to solve for XYZ. Do you have companies in your portfolio that could support this? We also work and participate on selection committee panels, sharing of topics. We mentor a lot of startups, both just in the spirit of innovation. It's not necessarily that it's tit for tat, but so it's this external ecosystem we rely really heavily on to innovate and bring the outside in.
Okay, that sounds great. So how about you, Toby? Like X15, where does X15 go, for new ideas and fresh perspectives, and, how do you actually...
Yeah, sure. Not a dissimilar thesis to Tara. I mean, I don't think I articulated it very clearly in my intro, but, our reason for being is to build, new ventures and services around the customer experience of banking. Sometimes it will be fintech, sometimes it'll be other steps in a customer's journey that really, really matter. So, no one wakes up in the morning and wants to get a mortgage. They want to get a home, and there's a whole bunch of different services and steps you need to take to do so. And that's really where we see opportunity. So sort of with that context in mind, absolutely aligned with Tara, we do look internally to define, where those gaps are. We've got 15 million customers. We can get some very strong signals, both online and actually through, branch network of what some of those needs, what some of those, feelings, and what some of those sort of gaps are or breakpoints that can be solved for. But in terms of who solves for that problem and how, absolutely a very strong bias to external talent and external ventures. So in terms of the pipelines that we've got a formal front door process, and one of our early learnings is to make sure that the hurdle is high enough on that front door to sort of make sure we can filter out the noise and create enough pressure. We've probably been fortunate and unlucky with having too much volume early on, in my view. And then we've got a bunch of programs, not dissimilar to Tara, ranging from, we run our own version of a sort of a venture acceleration program called Accelerate. Everything has an X in front of it, given our branding, which is nice and easy. We have relationships with all the local sort of founder forums and startup hubs. And then probably the one that's been most promising to us in the early days is we've actually made a couple of investments in some venture capital funds. One, probably Australia's leading VC, or they would certainly make the case, and I think it could be true, called Square Peg Capital. They've got a presence mostly in Australia, Southeast Asia and Israel. And we've also made an investment in a West Coast-based VC called Zeta, a smaller VC, but they're the first, they were the first specialist AI VC. And by investing in them, we've sort of formed a strategic relationship with them to actually collaborate on opportunity identification, portfolio companies. You know, really, really interesting, bringing people who day in, day out, all they do is evaluate opportunities, bringing their voice to the table, and they do have a seat at our table, makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's fabulous to understand how it works within X15, Toby. And anything that you want to add, Sallie, you know, from your perspective, how do you actually go after new?
Yeah. So on the venture fund side, we primarily co-invest into seed stage startups. On the Foundry side, it's a no equity accelerator program. So we work with seed all the way to Series C. And so we are very much just enterprise software focused. So we make sure that we are in touch with all of the right communities, the right accelerator programs, the right VCs, and also like sort of organizations that have the same mission that we do. And so we do get a lot of good referrals. I actually call our Foundry a graduate school of accelerator programs. And so a lot of the other accelerators are great pipelines for us. So we've developed a very robust relationships with them, as well as VCs that could refer us deals. And word of mouth from startups is always good. And I do a lot of cold outreach too, because no one knows our vision more than the folks on our team. And so I very much have I sit on the corporate strategy team. We have firm-wide initiatives and strategy and thematic focus areas. And so I am out there with that in mind when I source and look for companies to work with. And oftentimes with later stage companies in the A, B, C stage, a Foundry accelerator program is not on their radar. So it does take a lot of awareness and bringing this to light to some of these teams. And so we do a lot of, conferences as well. We're out there. We try to get our name out there. And then finally, we have this pledge that I do want to bring up. It's an initiative called No Boundaries at sap.io. And it's something where we pledge that 40% of our portfolio will be led by underrepresented founders. And oftentimes that, in certain industries, deep tech or hard tech industries, sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper and look for that type of representation from the founder level. And so that means I have the fun of going out and doing a lot of sourcing for companies so that we can get to that 40%, which means we're looking for 200 such underrepresented led startups by 2023.
Awesome. That's also very interesting to understand, the spread of, how you go after your idea sources and, venture sources. Fantastic perspectives from across 3 different panelists. The next question is for, both Toby and Sallie, so do you guys fund idea stage startups at all, right? So you can choose who wants to go first, or do you actually, only go after established and growth stage startups? if you can throw some light on that. Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
Okay. Short answer for us, we've only been around for 6 months. We've got 4 ventures that are live in market. So by necessity, they were all new ventures that we built out, some with external entrepreneurs, some initially internal teams. The long-term vision, though, is we'd love to invest into scale and conduct M&A to really accelerate the portfolio. And we've got a bunch of both of those flavors of opportunities in the pipeline right now. So, I think what's interesting about maybe interesting about our approach is, we don't anchor to a particular stage. A little bit, I guess, to maybe a bad analogy, but sort of almost like the rocket internet of financial services. We're very, very happy to, there are some opportunities for which there are very, very strong signals and validation, either locally or globally. And in some of those cases, we will be happy to build with conviction. So skip a few steps in the sort of validation process you'd normally go through. And then in other cases, as I mentioned, acquisition or invest in someone who exists already. But our core thesis, which may be a little bit different to Sallie's, or not thesis, but sort of operating model, is, we won't make a standalone minority equity investment in a business unless we've got a clear pathway to control, and not control out of some sort of abstract notion of needing to be on top of that venture, but because we don't think we can deliver any benefits to a venture unless we can actually work very closely with them in all these. We've built a whole series of APIs and integrations back into our parent bank, which gives the advantage to those ventures. And so that's how we're approaching it, which won't work for everyone who really just want a classic CVC investor. We're probably not the right source for that.
Okay, thanks, Toby. And Sallie, your perspective on that? Mm-hmm.
For external startups, we don't work with startups that are idea stage. We have a venture studio for entrepreneurs at SAP where they do launch ideas, and SAP will have sort of a pitch competition, and they'll choose finalist teams to end up creating the product and try to commercialize it. And so the winning team is something that is creating something of value to SAP customers, right? On the SAP.io fund and Foundry side, we don't work with idea stage. At the earliest, the fund could look at pre-seed startups to invest in, because we start at $250K US dollar checks and we co-invest. And so at that stage, sometimes we do run into pre-seed, and so there we're looking at the team and their track record and the market that they're trying to tap into. On the Foundry side, we look for pre-launch. We look for strong product market fit already with enterprise customers, because they're coming in to work with SAP, which is a behemoth of a company, and it takes a certain stage to be able to get to those strategic goals that I mentioned earlier around integration with SAP solutions and getting bite from SAP customers. And oftentimes at the idea stage, or when it's too early, they don't really have the capability to work with enterprise yet.
Okay, thank you. Then I have a question for Tara now. So do you back the jockey or the horse, right? So do you actually back the idea or the people behind the idea? What is your take on that?
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, of course, it has to be a good idea, but if we're not confident in the team that's behind it, then it's not something that we believe is a good offering or something that we want to test in the first place. And vice versa. You can have the most amazing team, but if it's not an idea where we see that there could be value for us, and value, we don't define value as immediate ROI. We look at it in multiple horizons. But at some point for BASF, you can have a wonderful team, you can love the person, but if there's not something substantial for us, we won't back that either.
Guys, can I dig a little deeper there? So what is, you just touched on that in terms of value, what do you consider as value? If not the ROI, what might, what do you measure, in terms of how do you know if it's a valuable venture or not, by just looking at the ideas?
Yeah, I think it just depends what's the technology and where we're testing it to implement it. It's always this catch-22 of how do we justify where we're putting in our efforts and we're devoting resources if we can't immediately contribute to bottom line ROI. So we look at innovation in a few ways. I mean, there's the short, medium, and long termers. Probably we've studied in our academic frameworks, Horizon 1, 2, and 3. Is this something that is going to really disrupt for the longer term and create something of new value for BASF? Is it more in the medium term, it will help drive some business, or is it just something that's going to support us in the short term and right now? And then we look at, so with that in mind, short, medium, and long term, we look at what are we testing? Is this something that is going to, if it's not going to contribute to the ROI, is it going to create efficiencies? Is it going to support some of our other initiatives, whether it be reduction of employee turnover? Will it also help to raise awareness on new market trends to help us determine where we should be investing R&D spend? So we look at what KPIs are important and where we're testing this technology to derive its value.
Okay, yeah, that's a great answer, Tara. Over to Toby and Sallie, if you want to add anything on top of what Tara said, what's your perspective, jockey or the horse?
I was just going to build on Tara's comment around, sources of value for the parent company. We've pondered one a bit, and it might be of interest. We recognize that for a lot of our ventures, they need to serve a much broader customer set than just our enterprise. But it is a wonderful sort of beachhead to be able to, work with a company like Commonwealth Bank. So what we actually force is by the time a venture gets to a sort of material funding stage, which I guess you'd call equivalent to, Series A or B, they need to have a commercial contract in place with CBA, and preferably they need to have a pipeline for how they're going to target other customers as well. We've looked, it's a really tough issue that otherwise there's a risk that you become a little foundry for building out nice to have ideas and feature sets for the core business, and you sort of compete with your digital arm of the bank. And we don't want to do that because I don't think we'll create enough value there. So that's something we've done.
Okay. Sounds great. Sallie?
I'll just quickly, I'll
sure.
quickly add. I think it's both the jockey and the horse, but I definitely think the team is everything, because it takes a certain type of person who's persistent and has humility and is coachable and is willing to adjust, work with different types of customers, because enterprise sales cycle is very long and startup life cycle is very long. And so you want to have people that are on the team that are in it for the right reasons and have the right background. And so I've definitely come across, people that are not in the startup world for the right reason, and something will happen and they will not take responsibility or some other kind of situation. So definitely think that betting on the team is extremely important. And then just going back to the point around having the diversity of teams as well, if you're building AI and algorithms and you're not representative of the type of end user or customers that you're building this product for, you won't be able to build a solution that is going to be top tier or represent the type of solutions that people are looking for. For us, we do deep product diligence because part of our interest is in the solutions that the startups are building out. And so our teams will have our SAPIO team do the initial screening and taking a look at the startup from all the different venture angles, but then we'll bring in product specialists to ask all of the right questions about the product and where their product roadmap is going.
Okay, that's great. So, while I still got you there, Sallie, can I also understand how much of a strategic alignment is a big factor in making that decision to go with a particular idea or venture? Is that very important for you? If so, can you just elaborate a little bit on that? Yeah.
Yes, it's the number one thing. And so I mentioned the product fit is very important for us, and the value proposition to SAP customers is very important to us. That's why we work with, Tara from BASF very closely, because BASF is one of SAP's very strategic customers. And these are the type of customers we go to, and we not only work with our business units, but we also approach customers directly to ask them, in your industry, what are the pain points? What are you looking for? In this COVID times, in this environment, what's really important for you? And then I gather all of that information, and I do a lot of my sourcing based on all of this feedback that I collect. And then the final stages of selecting startups for our portfolio, we loop in our business units and our customers to say, this is a company that is something that I need and that I will be a customer for, that I'm interested in doing a pilot for. And that's how we know that we can be impactful for both SAP, the customer, and the startup by giving them these opportunities.
Makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah. And how about Tara? Can you chime in and tell us your views on that? How much is strategy alignment a key part of it, or would you back an interesting idea despite strategic alignment?
Of course, we want to support our strategic alignment, and we do work closely with our strategic group in understanding where their priorities are and aligning some of our digital strategies. But we can't move the needle for BASF if we are only sticking to the strategy. So we do have some ability to experiment, go out of the norm, where it might not directly align to strategy or roadmaps, but as long as we can see that there might be potential for this to work at some point in BASF and provide this value I mentioned, we do like experimenting and trying different things.
Beautiful, thank you. So just a reminder for the audience, so feel free to ask your questions on the chat window, and Hira would be collecting these questions, and towards the end we can have a 10 to 12 minutes for audience questions as well. And over to you, Toby. So what about your what is your thoughts on the strategic alignment? Do you always try to align with the CBA or the Commonwealth Bank strategy, when you're scouting for ventures for X15, or do you have a completely different vision and portfolio?
Yeah, a bit of both is the honest answer. I mean, I think there's a real risk that you spend too much time sort of facing internally and PowerPointing. And if you spend too much time, I guess if I step back, what we look at is it still solving for, a problem or a desirable opportunity for a relevant customer of CBA. But in terms of how you capture value for the bank, or what they think about how you should go about that, I think you need to have a bit of healthy tension where you actually say, let's build something that has desirability, product market fit, that has potential, and worry about that later. So I think, yes, the pressure point for us is there's no point us backing a venture for which, the bank can't provide extreme leverage to that venture and advantage. Otherwise, they've got no business building through us, and we wouldn't be the best shop for it. So it's got to be a relevant thing for a customer, or the data that the bank holds has to be relevant to advantage that business. But probably cautiously, we don't directly align to strategy so much as it's got to be valuable to a customer. There's a second small bucket where we'll actually just, we're happy to compete with the bank. Absolutely recognize that, the banking industry, like, every is on some stage of the disruption curve, and everyone else will have different views upon where it is. So we are building some ventures now, none which are public, which will compete more directly, which should be interesting.
That's really interesting, actually. So let me just quickly switch gears a little bit, right? So far we've been talking about how do you scout for ideas and how do you actually, select ideas. But let's talk about, what happens after selection, right? So you select and you are kind of very keen to invest in a particular idea. What happens next, right? So what do you offer them, and what do you take in return for that, right? So let's start with Toby on that. So what's your take on that, Toby? So how do you guys do it?
Yeah, the honest answer would be we're still iterating and playing around with what our value proposition is to entrepreneurs and why it's attractive. Our position on equity, for example, is particularly for new ideas. Our default is not necessarily that equity is the right, actually most equitable mechanism for a founder coming in, which I know goes against a lot of orthodoxy there. That's partly because some of the levers for value creation for that venture, we think actually sit within the API suite and the relationship back in with the bank. But we do prosecute that on a case-by-case basis. So I think if I step back overall, how do we work with that entrepreneur who comes in or founder team that we acquire? I would say it's a slightly different one of the value propositions, which might be interestingly to Sallie's point around looking for underrepresented and more diverse teams. One of our propositions is a slightly probably different risk return profile than the traditional sort of, the classic sort of founder taking on 100% risk and 100% equity. We're not going to be on that end of the spectrum. We're going to be much sort of closer to that more sort of corporate venturing model, which might be appealing to different types of founders or different types of entrepreneurs and people who may not necessarily come in with the background and the confidence to have those classic relationships with VCs, etc. So yeah, look, to be honest, pretty early days, and our best litmus test is when entrepreneurs come in, and we've got a number building with us now, and the profile we've seen a lot is an entrepreneur who's actually built a venture and exited, with some success already, but not sort of so much success that they're up and off. And I think the reason why is the penny drops for them on some of the advantages that we can offer, 15 million local customers, really, really quick to get up and get a world-class sort of, resilient tech stack in place. As some of them look at that and say, that's really interesting. If I'm going to build a fintech business, these advantages are quite material, and they sort of understand that trade-off. So that's quite a broad answer, but, that's how we're thinking about it. In terms of, a couple of other innovations for earlier stage ideas, we're playing around with safe notes and structures like that to move quickly. Really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And how about Sallie? I think your approach is considerably different to what Toby has just mentioned, right? So can you elaborate a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So on the venture capital fund side, we do take equity, and we do safe notes and convertible notes, and preferred stock as well. And so that's typical venture capital model in terms of what financial instruments we're using. I do agree that not all equity is equitable. That's a great saying, Toby. And on the Foundry side, we have a no equity model, which means we're just super founder friendly. We're not taking anything from them, which is atypical from accelerator programs. But what we're really looking to do is just create a partner ecosystem and a way to work with all of these startups, and that can be from any kind of angle within enterprise. It allows us to work with, over 100 startups every single year through SAPIO because of this no equity model. And it is better for underrepresented founders who oftentimes, have to give up more ownership to raise the same amount of capital as non-underrepresented. So it gives another great opportunity on that end. So yeah, our model is unique, but it gives us a lot of freedom to play with different types of companies and different stages of companies. And so we've really benefited from that. Initially we worked with an accelerator, like an outsourced accelerator, before we brought SAPIO in-house. And we noticed that because they were taking equity for I don't know what it was, 200K for 7%, they just weren't able to attract the right kind of startups that SAP really cares about and really is strategic for us.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. I have a slightly different question for Tara. So once you onboarded a particular startup or a idea within your organization, what kind of facilities do you offer for them to, grow, flourish, make connections, and, become a full-on venture, right? So what kind of connections do you provide? What facilities do you provide?
Yeah, let me just take one step back and just talk about the process to get on board, and then I'll answer that, because that's an interesting thing that we've set up that's a bit unique. So first, we do find really interesting technologies, and whether or not they align with our strategy, we have to have an internal partner, whether that be one of our business units or one of our functions, that is actually interested and will be managing the pilot. The reason being, our team find many interesting, wonderful, creative tech, but if we don't have an internal user to actually validate it, it's not going to go anywhere. So once we have that alignment, then we define the KPIs together and the scope. So what can we test in the segment of the pilot, or as we refer to them, POVs, proof of values, because we're demonstrating the value of them together, and that all interests are aligned, both with the startup and with our internal partner at BASF. And then once that's set, we will onboard the startups with a fairly creative process that we've put together called our fast track process. And we've, originally when we started piloting technologies, we were getting caught up in our own red tape and our own bureaucracy with legal, procurement, and IT, and it was literally taking months to onboard startups, which you can't move at that pace when you're testing new things. And so with our leadership, we worked with each of those groups, so with legal, procurement, and IT, to create a fast track process that would allow us to test these companies so we could onboard them into our systems, have an NDA in place, be a mechanism to pay them quickly. And so within a process that would usually take several months, we boiled down to about a week. So that allows us to have that rapid prototyping and testing. So once we have them on board, then we have a workshop with the internal partner. We bring everyone in the same room. Now in COVID, it's of course all virtual, but we found, having everyone in the same room brings together ideas, brings out things that you wouldn't naturally be able to plan for over a telco. And then we figure out what's the structure of the pilot and how do we run it and what do they need for it. So, data is usually a big component. So where are the right data pools in BASF for them to access this? If it's the business management, there's a business aspect to it, usually the internal partner who is working with them will help coach them, help give guidance. I will be there as well. But the benefit of having the pilot manager from our business supporting them is that they know their business as well. They can properly provide insights, help tailor. So it gives them, the startups, also an insight into how our business works, where our priorities, and to ensure a more smooth pilot. So what's available is the tools. Again, what do they need to succeed? And then the mentorship and access to the right partners within BASF to give them insights and mentorship.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. Just moving on to some audience questions very quickly. So the first question that I have, I'm not sure exactly who asked that question, but the question is, I'm developing an ergonomics management system that I believe would be interesting for SAP customers. Any chance that we can talk to someone within SAP IO? So it's a question for Sallie, of course.
We already directly messaged, and he has my contact. So.
Okay, too late to ask that question then. Okay, so moving on to the next question, perhaps you already discussed this as well, but then it becomes easier. Are your programs available worldwide? Are there specific, regional preference? Do you have regional offices or representatives? I think we touched upon that a little bit in Sallie's case. But this is basically a question for Toby and Tara as well. So do you, and also attached to that question is, do you work with universities or research centers for solving specific problems or to create technology, or are you only directed towards startups? So maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Tara, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can take that first. So yes, I mean, we are a global organization, and we do have a footprint across Latin America, North America, Europe, and Asia. I shared in the chat our website that it helps route if you believe you have a proposition for BASF around digital innovation. We actually have an active team. It does not go into a black hole, and they can help guide where your technology might be best rooted. And some of it's push, some of it's pull. It's just where's their opportunities. So sometimes something might not work out in North America for one reason, and I will go to colleagues in Asia and say, I have this technology. Is this something that might be of interest to you? They might do the same, my colleagues in Asia and so forth. So don't be dissuaded if you don't have success in one region and these large companies. There's opportunities in other areas. So be persistent, as Sallie mentioned. It's definitely an important trait.
Okay. And how about you, Toby? Can you quickly respond to that?
So look, we will primarily focus on first solving for problems in Australia, because that's again where we can lend advantage to ventures. We then absolutely aspire to take those ventures where it makes sense to serve a global audience. We've got one vehicle that's business that's starting to sell globally, and that's where we'll leverage our VC relationships, which I mentioned, as well as we have a partnership with Microsoft and KPMG as well, who will help distribute product and find the right markets internationally. But we will start in Oz, because that's where we think we can advantage those ventures. In terms of the university question, we've got a separate team inside the bank, an emerging technology team, who do all sorts of good stuff with university research projects. Big recent investment in quantum computing. We work with Harvard quite a lot, Harvard Star Labs in particular. We've got one of the leading behavioral economics teams in the globe related to banking, largely US original team that have moved out here. So a lot of collaboration with universities, probably less so for us. I think it's not always quite mature enough, the opportunities that are coming out for us to deal with.
Okay. Thank you for that. And while we are on that topic, I have a question of my own. It's very close to that. So we are actually, as part of LISA, we are, and as you know, we are an incubator and accelerator for the LEAD community, which is an exec education community within the Stanford PSP. And one of the proposals that we have is to open up LISA for open innovation and corporate ventures and so forth. this is something that we are seriously considering in the next cohort. So what would you guys be interested if we open up for something like that to pose a innovation challenge or a venture challenge to our cohorts? It's basically an open question, so any of you can answer that. Tara, do you want to go?
Yes, we most definitely would be interested in supporting and participating in an open innovation challenge. We've done this already with some of our ecosystem partners, both private partners and also with academia, and we would most definitely love to do something with GSB.
Okay, that'll be really awesome, actually. So we'll connect on that, Tara.
Most definitely, sure. I look forward to it.
Sure, cheers. And any comments from?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mentioned that there's a certain stage of company that becomes the right fit for SCPIO, but we build relationships with startups very early on. Joe, I mentioned this to you before, that, you know, there's some relationships I've had for like 3-4 years, just at the earlier stage, because I mentor and advise startups personally, and meeting them when they're in the beginning stages, they're not necessarily right fit for SCP, but we've continued to build the relationship, and you know, I've been always interested in, like I mentioned, good founders and good teams, and so we kept in touch. And then, you know, one of the companies from earlier this year, it was someone I built a relationship for like 4 years. So it's never too late to just to get to know people like us on a panel.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can pretty much leverage Lisa as your incubator within the GSP, and then, you know, pick and choose the ideas that you want to back. Yeah, Toby, your comments actually. So you get to hear your perspectives.
To say yes. I think Sally sort of touched on it. Like the reality check is, you know, the commercial maturity of idea and opportunity is one of the challenges. With that caveat in mind, that's not a problem. We run this program called Accelerate, you know, twice a year. So I'd love to sort of link into GSB, particularly when we land on a thematic that I think is absolutely, the service proposition is a global customer proposition. I think that's going to make most sense to your community. Particularly in the current times, no one's flying out to Oz. Then the other dimension I thought I'd touch on is we launched in February, just at the very beginning of COVID, and we had a big video event and had hundreds of people packed in a very small room. And lucky it didn't turn out to be a vector for something else. But the reason I mention that is that our sort of without wanting to be too highfalutin, our sort of DNA from day one has been shaped by that. We want to be a technology first culture inside our team. A lot of technologists have led the world in working asymmetrically, remotely, and with, you know, tooling and programs that are sort of fit for purpose for the world we've all now been thrust into. So long story short, that means we've got engineers, data scientists, employees scattered all over the globe already, you know, often leveraging some of the sort of more secure next generation sort of freelancing and contracting platforms. So just because we're based in Australia, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't opportunities as well on a talent and employment front to work in one of our ventures.
Absolutely, that's great to hear, and I look forward to connecting with all of you in relation to the Lisa Ventures and the future cohort and what we are working on, and also to understand, you know, what you guys are looking for, and see if we can, you know, offer, you know, add any value to what you guys are after, right? So thank you all. I think we are at time. Thank you all for participating, all the audience, and especially to the panelists for sharing their views and perspectives with us. Fantastic discussions, guys. Appreciate everyone once again for joining, and thank you, Hira and Lisa team, for organizing this. Appreciate everyone for all the efforts that you have put in for this, for making this event happen. Thank you all.